He didn't have much to his name anymore. Just a weary roadside diner with peeling paint, an oven that groaned like old bones, and a daughter who hadn't quite learned how to smile again. Harland Ridge had lost nearly everything that ever mattered. But when a trembling woman and her 3 frail children appeared behind his diner late one cold evening, hunger in their eyes and despair clinging to their skin, he did something no one saw coming. He opened his door. What happened next wasn't about charity. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something neither of them could have anticipated. It was the quiet beginning of a miracle. This is the story of a man who had nothing left to give, and yet somehow gave everything. A story of how a grieving father baked hope into a broken family's life, one warm biscuit, one quiet act of kindness, and one soul-deep decision at a time. If stories of resilience, compassion, and quiet courage touch something in you, stay with us. Because sometimes the gentlest light shines not from a cathedral or a hero's speech, but from a forgotten kitchen in the middle of a desert road. As the Arizona sun began its slow descent behind rust-red hills and creaking cactus shadows, the day faded into golden hush. There, tucked between cracked asphalt and tumbleweeds, stood the Ridgetop Cafe, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. Inside, the stillness was broken only by the delicate chime of a spoon against ceramic. Harland stood behind the counter, tall and worn like the leather boots he'd had for years, methodically wiping each inch of the surface. He gave the task his full attention. It mattered. Annie would have insisted on spotless counters even now, 3 years since the cancer took her. Her memory lingered in every detail, the spice jars labelled in her handwriting, the neatly folded napkins, the soft creak of her favourite booth. In the far corner sat Junie, his 13-year-old daughter, legs curled up beside her violin case, untouched since last Thursday's music lesson. Her schoolbook lay open but forgotten. She wasn't studying, she was watching him, and the window and the way the desert night crept in. The diner had barely seen customers that day. A pair of road-weary tourists, a truck driver with pie and black coffee, just enough business to keep the fryer running, barely enough to justify the lights. But silence didn't bother Harland. Silence was safe, predictable, contained. Then a sound disrupted it, a faint scrape, a hushed thump, a whisper of movement outside the back door. Junie lifted her head. "Did you hear that?" "Probably a stray dog," Harland said, already reaching for the flashlight under the counter. He moved through the kitchen quietly, boots soft on worn tile. He pushed open the back door and froze. It wasn't a dog. Crouched beside the garbage bins was a woman, tattered coat wrapped tightly around her, eyes sharp with fear and exhaustion. Clinging to her leg was a small child in a hoodie several sizes too big. 2 more children stood nearby, silent and still, cheeks raw from the cold, eyes wide and wary. Harland's voice was low. "What's your name?" "Ellery," she replied. "These are my kids, Maisie, Flora and Toby. You got any food?" She hesitated. "Not today." "You sleeping in that van?" He gestured toward the fogged-up windows at the edge of the lot. A pause, then a reluctant yes. Harland didn't answer right away. He just held the door open and stepped aside. "Come in. There's chili on the stove." Ellery blinked, uncertain. "We're not looking for handouts." "I'm not offering charity," he said. "I'm offering cornbread." Inside, warmth welcomed them like an old quilt. Junie sat up straighter, watching with wary eyes as her father ladled chili into mismatched bowls, sliced thick squares of cornbread and poured warm milk into a jug. Ellery tried to protest again, her voice trembling, but Harland only said, "Eat." The children didn't wait for further invitation. They devoured the food with a hunger that was more than just physical. Harland watched from behind the counter, pretending to stack plates, but really, he was watching them. Always watching. He saw the way Ellery kept her back straight, ready to defend even in the warmth of safety. The way she gently cooled each spoonful before feeding Toby. She had nothing left, but still gave. Later, Junie slid from her booth and approached him. "Are they staying?" Harland looked at the little ones. Toby asleep, his cheek pressed against the table, the girls leaning into their mother, full and finally still. "I don't know," he said softly, but his voice betrayed him. Back in the kitchen, he pulled down an old notebook, Annie's recipe journal. He hadn't opened it in years. His hands hovered over the page labelled Honey Biscuits for Bad Days. He hadn't made those since she passed. That night, while the world cooled into quiet, The Ridgetop Cafe stayed open just a little longer, and in that small flickering oasis something shifted. Not just kindness, not just obligation. Something sacred had begun, something no one had a name for yet. By morning the air held the scent of cinnamon and butter. Harlan was up before dawn, cracking eggs and humming to himself, a sound Junie hadn't heard in 3 years. There was light in him now. Not much, but enough to make her cautious. He was baking biscuits from scratch. Junie watched from the booth, arms crossed. She didn't like it, the change, the strangers in their backyard, the way her father looked at that woman. Ellery entered the cafe with her children. They were cleaner now, washed faces, brushed hair, but still wrapped in too thin clothes. Harlan smiled softly and gestured to the coffee pot. Fresh brewed. Ellery sat. Junie stared. Maisie and Flora wandered near Junie's table. Flora pointed at her violin case. "What's that?" Junie didn't answer. Ellery noticed. "Sorry, she's just curious." "It's fine," Junie muttered, though her notebook snapped closed. Later, Harlan found Junie behind the diner, arms around her knees, eyes heavy with something deeper than irritation. "You okay?" She didn't look at him. "I guess." "I didn't ask," she replied. He sat beside her, silence settling between them. "She just shows up," Junie said eventually. And suddenly everything's warm biscuits and smiles. But where was all that when Mom died? Where was the cornbread then? Harlan stared at his hands rough from work, from survival. "I was breathing," he said. "Not living." She sniffled. "And now you're living?" "I think I forgot how." He didn't ask her to like them. He only asked her to see them. That night, as Ellery washed dishes, her hands wrinkled from soapy water, the girls sat with Toby colouring at a small table. Junie took out her violin, slowly, deliberately, and she played. Not a full song, just a soft tune, unfinished. The kind of melody her mother used to hum on rainy days. The room froze. Even Ellery turned, hands still dripping. When Junie stopped, she walked out without a word. Maisie whispered, "I think I heard that song before." Toby looked up from his crayon drawing. It was pretty. Later, Harlan crept into the mobile home with an extra quilt, tucked it gently around Toby. As he turned to go, Ellery stood in the doorway. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied, "but sometimes kindness is the only thing that makes sense." By Thursday, things at the Ridgetop Cafe felt different. Not loudly, not suddenly, but the air had shifted. Ellery swept the porch, scrubbed the mobile home's windows, left a folded thank you note by the sink. Harlan read it twice, then slipped it into his flannel pocket. He didn't mention it. Just rolled up his sleeves and baked Annie's cornbread again, this time with a dash of cayenne, just like she used to in the cold months. "You cook like someone who used to cook for love," Ellery said, watching from across the counter. "I did," Harlan replied, "for Annie." She stirred her coffee. "This place, it remembers her." Their eyes met, and the silence between them swelled with something deep, grief not erased, but carefully folded into the rhythm of life. "She's still here," he said, "just not in the way I'd like." And in that moment, between shared pain and flickering hope, something new began to rise, like dough in a warm oven, like healing breaking through the crust of long-held sorrow. Harlan's breath caught unexpectedly. The boy's words had struck a nerve he didn't know was exposed. He looked down at Toby, whose small frame seemed impossibly still, and gently asked, "Your dad, is he?" The question trailed off, more breath than voice. Toby gave a shrug, the kind only a child too young to understand the gravity of absence could manage. "He left before Flora was born," he said simply. "Mama used to say he had too many storms inside." His voice didn't waver, not from grief, not from longing, just truth, unsoftened. Harlan swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "I think he forgot us," Toby added, his tone not bitter but matter-of-fact, like reporting the weather. Harlan placed a careful hand on the boy's tiny shoulder, the weight of empathy pressing into his palm. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly, firmly. Toby tilted his head and looked up at him with the earnest curiosity only children possess. "Do you ever wish for someone?" The question struck Harlan like a blow to the ribs, unexpected and precise. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Toby, unbothered by the silence, handed him a blank napkin. "Here," he said softly, "you can write it down." The napkin felt heavier than paper should as Harlan took it. Around them, life carried on in hushed details, the quiet ticking of the oven behind them, the distant clink of a spoon against ceramic, and outside, the wind of the Arizona desert swirling through dry weeds. The world hadn't paused, but something inside Harlan had. He wrote slowly, the pen scratching like it was peeling back layers. I wish I could forgive myself. Toby didn't read it. He simply folded the napkin, treating it like something sacred, and dropped it into the wish jar with a tiny nod. Now the oven will know, he said with solemn certainty. That night, after the cafe had dimmed and the laughter of the day had faded, Ellery found Harlan alone, sitting on the back step, the jar beside him, its lid still off as if it was listening. She didn't speak right away, just sat beside him, close enough to feel the weight he was carrying. I didn't expect him to get to me, Harlan confessed at last. Ellery gave a knowing smile. He has a way of doing that. He asked about his dad, Harlan added, the words catching in his throat. I told them I didn't know where he went, but I do. I asked him to stop gambling. He didn't. And I knew he wasn't coming back. Harlan looked over at her, guilt swimming in his eyes. That couldn't have been easy. Ellery's voice was steady. It wasn't, but staying would have been worse. Silence settled over them again, not heavy this time, just real. Do you ever think about starting over? He asked quietly. She glanced at him, eyebrows raised. You mean leaving all this? No, he said, shaking his head. I mean starting again, right here. Ellery exhaled, her breath a soft release. Every time I pulled something out of that oven. Inside, Junie was tucking Toby into bed when she noticed the jar on his nightstand. Curiosity got the better of her. She reached in and pulled out a folded napkin addressed in childish handwriting to Miss Junie. She opened it carefully. I wish you weren't scared of love. Junie stared at the words, her breath catching. Then, almost instinctively, she slid the note under her pillow like it might keep her safe in the night. Before sunrise, in the hushed stillness of early morning, Harlan stood in the kitchen. One hand rested on the oven's door, the other pressed against his own chest as if to still his heartbeat. He didn't bake anything, he didn't open the oven. But into the quiet air he whispered, I wish I knew how to try again. And somehow in that moment, bathed in morning shadows and surrounded by silence, it didn't feel like he was alone. Just before noon, the door creaked open and a man stepped inside. He was tall, lean, maybe in his mid-60s. Wore a brown felt hat too fine for the dust and sun of Arizona, and shoes far too polished for the gravel roads outside. His eyes scanned the cafe like someone exploring a forgotten shrine. Harlan greeted him with the same nod he gave every guest. Coffee's fresh. Peach tart just came out of the oven. The man smiled, warm and a little tired. I'll take both, and a seat by the window if that's all right. Anywhere you like, Harlan replied, sliding a mug across the counter. The stranger sat quietly, eyes fixed on the horizon outside, the cracked road, the endless sky, as if waiting for a memory to return. Then he took a bite of the tart. He froze, chewed slowly, then took another bite. Harlan watched him. Most people closed their eyes, maybe smiled, sometimes whispered a quiet, wow. But this man, his reaction was different, deeper. His brow furrowed as though he had just heard a song he hadn't known, he remembered. He waved Harlan over. Who made this? Harlan hesitated. Recipe's mine, but the hands were hers. He nodded toward Ellery, who was wiping down tables. The man turned. Miss, may I say, this is extraordinary. You've captured something rare, familiar but surprising. Ellery flushed. Thank you. It's based on an old family recipe. The man leaned back, studying them both. Mind if I ask a few questions? I do a little radio program, food stories, the kind people listen to when they're stuck in traffic. Harlan raised an eyebrow. Name's Leonard Price. You probably haven't heard of me, but maybe your grandma listened to Plates and Places. Ellery blinked. My mom used to play that every Sunday in the kitchen. Leonard smiled. Still running. Barely. He pulled out a notebook and pen. Tell me, how does a diner in the middle of nowhere serve something this soulful? Harlan didn't say much, but Ellery did. She spoke with a quiet humility about the oven, the zest, the kids who folded napkins behind the counter. She didn't mention the jar of wishes or the tin of paper stars. But the magic was in her voice. Leonard scribbled. Why here? Why now? Ellery paused, then answered softly, because we had nowhere else to go, but kindness found us before despair did. Leonard closed his notebook. That's all I need. He paid in cash, left a $20 tip, and walked out into the desert sun. 2 days later, the phone rang at 6:45 a.m. Junie picked up. Ridge stop, closed until 7. A chirpy voice replied, "Are you the girl who plays the violin? I heard about you on Plates and Places." Junie blinked. I guess?" The phone rang again. 10 minutes later, and again, and again. By noon, 3 couples from out of town had arrived, asking for the sunshine tart and the widow's oven. Harlan was confused until a neighbor dropped off a cassette tape. He played it. Leonard's warm voice filled the kitchen. He spoke of a place in the desert where peach tarts tasted like memory, and where a woman named Ellery and a man named Harlan were quietly baking the world back together. Ellery was folding napkins mid-sentence. Junie turned up the volume. "It's not just food," Leonard said. "It's about people who've lost too much and still find a way to offer sweetness. That's what America needs, not headlines, honey." By evening, the parking lot was full. Guests came from Flagstaff, Prescott, even Santa Fe. Some were quiet. Some teared up. One woman brought a photo of her late husband and asked if she could place it by the oven. Harlan nodded, unable to speak. The kids were everywhere, Flora handing out menus, Toby waving like they were royalty, Maisie directing napkin operations behind the counter like a general. And Junie? She played. For the first time outside of lessons or memories. Her violin rose above the clinks and chatter, tentative at first, then strong, pure. Even Harlan had to step into the pantry for a moment. That night, Ellery and Harlan sat on the back step again. "You're a radio star now," he teased. She laughed. "Hardly." Then she turned serious. "Do you think Annie would have liked the tart?" Harlan didn't pause. She would have asked for seconds. Ellery's eyes softened. "And would she be okay with me being here?" Harlan met her gaze. She always said the oven wasn't just for baking, it was for building. He pulled a napkin from his pocket. On it, in Toby's handwriting, "I wish people found our cafe." He held it up. "Looks like one came true." She didn't reply. She just reached for his hand, and together they sat under the stars while the oven cooled in the background, quiet but undeniably alive. 2 weeks. That's all that stood between Junie and her new life in Santa Fe. When she said it aloud, the room stilled. For a heartbeat, silence held the air like glass, then came the applause. Tears welled, joy bubbled over. Ellery hugged her as tightly as if they'd been sisters all along. Flora leapt like joy itself, her feet barely touching the ground. Toby, ever the snack diplomat, extended a cookie, his way of saying he'd miss her. Maisie, serious as ever, nodded once, her expression solemn with a quiet strength. "You'll be back," she said with such conviction it felt more like a promise than a guess. Junie turned to her, hesitant. "You really think so?" Without a word, Maisie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. Inside was a gold star and, written in big, blocky letters that carried the weight of a child's heart, the words, "We don't lose people who leave with love." Junie blinked, the lump in her throat too big to swallow. Then she hugged Maisie tight, and for the first time, Maisie let her. That night, after the stars had settled into their velvet beds and the last of the guests had long since gone home, Harlan found Junie sitting on the porch steps. Her shoes were off, her bare feet pressed against the wooden boards, grounding her. He stood beside her quietly. "You sure?" he asked, voice like warm tea. She nodded slowly. "More than I've ever been." He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he handed her a folded envelope, not the letter she'd once written to Annie, but something else. Inside was a photo, Annie sitting right on that same porch step, cradling baby Junie. A streak of flour adorned Annie's cheek, her eyes alight with laughter. On the back, in Annie's gentle cursive, were the words, "One day she'll fly." Junie pressed it to her chest, and the girl who had once resisted smiling as if it betrayed something precious, she smiled. The Ridgetop Cafe had never smelled sweeter. It was the 3rd Friday since the local radio had featured their story, and the cafe was no longer just a roadside stop. It was a destination. Orders came faster than Ellery could keep up with. Her hands bore the proof, marked with sugar and dough, wrists powdered with flour like morning ashes. But something was different that day. She couldn't name it exactly, only that Harlan was still, not distant but focused, like he was holding something tender behind his ribs, not yet ready to release it. At noon, without a word, he disappeared into the pantry. When he came back, he held Annie's old recipe book in his hands like it was a treasure. "Let's make cupcakes," he said. Ellery blinked. "Cupcakes? We've never made cupcakes." A small, crooked grin tugged at his mouth. Annie used to say they were tiny celebrations for days that didn't have birthdays. Ellery smiled. "All right, you pick." He nodded toward her. "You pick." She paused. "Lemon honey, with whipped cream frosting." "Perfect," he said, and so they baked, not in silence that separated, but in the kind that binds, a reverent hush, like two people whispering prayers with their hands. Maisie spooned the batter with precision. Flora sprinkled lemon zest across the tops like a woodland fairy dusting joy. Toby insisted that every cupcake smile, using toothpicks to poke tiny happy faces into each mound. In the corner, Junie, home for her final weekend, played her violin, a song as light as gauze, wrapping the cafe in golden notes. Ellery watched them all, her chest swelling not just with pride but with something deeper. This was home. This was no longer survival. This was life. Later, with customers gone and bellies full, the kids nestled into the mobile home with frosting on their fingers and dreams in their eyes. Junie offered to read Flora and Toby a bedtime story. Harlan, ever intuitive, asked Maisie to help count napkins, an excuse for conversation, more than inventory. Ellery was left in the kitchen, alone but not lonely. She washed the last mixing bowl, turned off the lights one by one until only the warm glow above the oven remained. That's when she saw it, a single cupcake, carefully placed on a small white plate, whipped cream frosting, a curl of lemon zest. But it wasn't the sweetness that caught her breath. It was the message, written in caramel gel. "Will you be our new beginning?" She stared. A full minute passed, maybe more. Then she turned. There he stood, Harlan, leaning in the doorway, arms folded loosely, his eyes impossibly gentle. "It's not a ring," he said softly. "I noticed," she whispered. "And not just from me," he added. "It's from Flora, Toby, Maisie, Junie, from Annie's photo by the window, from this oven humming like a lullaby." Ellery stepped forward, still wordless. "I've been proposed to before," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, like sugar dissolving in tea. There was a big ring, a hotel room, a lie. Harlan tilted his head. "And this one?" She looked again at the cupcake, then picked it up with care. "This one," she said, tears making her eyes shimmer, "came with a home." She took a bite. Sweet, tart, exactly right. Then she leaned in and kissed him, tender, certain, like a song that had been waiting for its chorus. That night, after dishes were done and ovens cooled, they all sat on the back porch, wrapped in mismatched quilts, wrapped in rightness. Junie cradled her violin. Toby snored softly against Harlan's arm, and Maisie broke the silence. "So," she asked, matter of fact, "does this mean we're a family now?" Ellery laughed, brushing a curl from Flora's face. "I think it does." Maisie nodded once. "Good, just checking." Junie grinned. "Guess I should practice a wedding song." Harlan squeezed Ellery's hand. "No rush." "No," Ellery said softly, "but no fear either." Inside the cafe, the cupcake plate still sat on the counter, empty but not forgotten. The message that had been written in frosting had already begun writing a new chapter in hearts that had nearly forgotten how to believe in love. The next morning, a red ribbon danced in the wind, frayed at the edges too long, plucked from a drawer where it had waited for its moment. It was tied to the door of a newly painted storefront, nestled in a small town between red hills and pecan groves. Above the window, Hope and Honey Bakery. The name had been Flora's idea. "Because that's what the oven gave us," she said. "Hope in the morning, honey at night." Harlan had laughed. "Sounds like a country song." Ellery had cried. The opening was quiet, intentionally so. No grand banners or flashing signs. Just folding chairs, checkered tablecloths, coffee brewed strong enough to hold a real conversation. The townspeople came. First a few, then more. One man brought a photo of his late wife, asking if he could leave it on the back shelf so she can smell the cinnamon rolls. Harlan nodded. It was becoming a theme. By noon, the display case was nearly empty. By 1, the peach tarts were gone. Maisie, in a navy apron too big for her, manned the counter like a general. Flora served milk with a flourish. Toby greeted everyone with, "Welcome to the miracle." Junie, back for the weekend, played soft jazz on the violin from the patio. People tipped extra, just for the music. And Ellery, she moved through it all with the ease of someone who had once been invisible and now felt entirely seen. Entirely chosen. Entirely home. That evening, as crumbs were swept and lights dimmed, Harlan turned on the oven one last time. It hissed to life, not just heat, but memory, promise, presence. He reached for a recipe card. Annie's handwriting still sang like music. "Thinking of her?" Ellery asked gently. "Always," he said, "but not like before." "How so?" "I used to think grief was a room I couldn't leave. Now I know it's a window she looks through sometimes." Ellery leaned into him. She'd be proud of this place, of you. They didn't need more words. The room, the smell, the warmth, the laughter still echoing, said enough. Outside, beneath strings of cafe lights and a sky embroidered with stars, the children had organized a little celebration. Folding chairs arranged in a half circle, a chalkboard sign. Tonight only, one story, one song, one wish. Toby took centre stage. "Welcome to the Ridge Family Show," Junie played. Flora danced. Maisie told a story about a dragon who couldn't breathe fire but saved the world with a cinnamon bun. Then Toby lifted the wish jar. It was almost full now. Not just napkins, but notes, drawings, folded poems from strangers and friends. He pulled one out and read, "I wish this family never forgets what brought them together." He glanced at Ellery, at Harlan. "That was me," he said. Laughter rang out, applause followed, and something deep and real settled into place. Later, as the children fell asleep on quilts and the stars leaned closer, Harlan stood at the window. In his hand, Annie's photo. He placed it gently above the oven, then added a second photo, taken just last week. Ellery dusted in flour, Maisie proud in her apron, Junie mid-laugh, Flora with a whisk like a wand, Toby mid-jump, joy uncontained. 2 photos, one past, one present, one home. And in the corner the oven glowed, soft, steady, not just a source of heat, but a heartbeat, a hearth. The last light left on for someone you love. The boy hadn't left. He was still there, quiet, watchful, and so was the soft, golden light glowing from the oven window like a heartbeat. Throughout the morning, he quietly lent a hand without being asked. He stacked chairs one by one with gentle care, refilled the syrup bottles with steady hands, and swept up crumbs from the floor, gathering them into little piles like someone trying to make sense of a scattered life. He didn't speak much. Words seemed like fragile things to him, too delicate to trust. But every now and then his eyes would wander, resting on Ellery, on Harlan, on the children, pausing as if he were trying to hold the moment in his memory, just in case this strange, comforting reality turned out to be only a dream he might wake from. Before noon came, he drifted toward the front counter, standing there awkwardly, his backpack slung over one shoulder like a weight he'd grown used to carrying. "I should go," he said, voice low, uncertain. Ellery met his eyes and gave a small nod. "If you need to," she replied gently. Maisie crossed her arms, defiant in her softness. "But you don't have to." Then Junie chimed in, hopeful. "We've got an extra cot and way too much granola." Just then, little Toby tugged at the boy's sleeve. "You forgot your cupcake," he said with innocent urgency, holding it out like an anchor in a storm. Caleb looked around, really looked at them, one by one, at all of them. Something shifted in his eyes. Slowly, almost cautiously, he set his backpack down by the door. "I'll stay a little while," he said, like someone testing the weight of hope. "If that's okay." "It is," Harlan answered without hesitation. "It always is." That evening, the bakery filled once again with the sweet, familiar scent of cinnamon and the soft murmur of music. Outside, the sky dimmed into a silvery grey dusk, casting a calm hush over the world. But the oven window, it glowed. It glowed like a lighthouse, warm, unwavering, alive, a quiet beacon. Not just for those who were hungry or lost, but for anyone courageous enough to come closer, or lucky enough to be welcomed in. And someday, somewhere down the road, another traveller will appear. A girl with nothing in her hands but hope. A man carrying only the weight of what he's lost. A boy with too many questions and no map to guide him. And they'll see it. A soft orange light flickering in the distance, and they'll follow it, step by step, until they reach a door. And when it opens, someone will be there with a kind smile and open arms, saying, "We just pulled something from the oven. You're right on time." We'd love to know where this story found you. Maybe it's a quiet morning, coffee in hand, or a peaceful evening where the wind is gentle and time feels slow. Share your city or country in the comments below. It brings us joy to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. Every like, comment and share helps us continue to bring you stories filled with kindness, healing and hope. Thank you, truly, for spending this moment with us. It means more than words can say. Until next time, take care, stay warm.